Picture this. It is the great year of 2012. Attack on Titan, a cultural phenomenon, was only a year away. An author uploaded his first chapter of his new web novel by the name of ReZero. I'm sure you've never heard of it. And most importantly, High School DxD started airing. However, there was one anime to come out during this time that changed the course of anime that's still being affected till this day. A canon event that shaped the next decade. And that anime is none other than Sword Art Online. With the release of this anime gaining so much popularity, so did the genre of isekai, getting transported into another world that's completely different to our own. And just like that, it was inescapable. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing more and more isekai being released. With every passing year, there are more and more isekai coming out, all filled with unoriginality trying to make a quick buck. But every once in a while, and I really do mean a while, you get these anime that break the mold of how an isekai should be, and the most recent anime I've seen to do this, well actually second now because Zen issues come out, Shangri La Frontier, is an anime that takes place in the near future in which video games have been completely replaced by virtual reality. The main character, Rakuro Hizutome, who adopted the gamertag Sunraku, specializes in the trashy virtual games that are riddled with bugs and exploits, have terrible hitboxes, and are all around just an unpleasant experience for the average person. So in short, Sunraku's a masochist, and after completing the trashiest of trash games, Faris Chronicles, he gets recommended the game Shangri La Frontier, which is nothing like the games he's used to. It's one of the most popular games played by millions of people and is recognized as one of the greatest games to ever be made. Now before I watched this show, I was skeptical. The premise didn't seem all that interesting to me, and the thing that turned me off the most was that I felt like there wouldn't be any stakes in the show, as even if the main character dies, he'll just respawn at his last checkpoint. It just sounded like Sword Art Online with no stakes. So even though it was highly recommended to me, I decided to skip the show. I recognize I should have been more open-minded to the show, but that's just how I felt at the time. So how does Shangri La Frontier tackle this issue? It does this by not only making the virtual world of Shangri La Frontier extremely immersive, but by also making the gaming community in its world compelling. The world building in this show is surprisingly so well put together, and after finding out that this is based on a light novel, I can't say I'm not surprised. Despite the lack in stakes, the series makes up for it by playing to its strengths. Everything down to the different places you can visit and how it affects how you fight, to how you can interact with NPCs. Even though the world of Shangri La Frontier is a game, it's able to feel like a real fantasy world. And the way the series incorporates different threats of bosses and also with the 7 Colossi is incredible. Despite being an MMO where millions of players are active every day, they have this mechanic of 7 different unique monsters that are one of a kind and that you can randomly encounter, and it's such a cool idea. They're so hard to kill that no one, despite the game being around for over a year, has ever been able to kill one. This adds to the world building as each unique boss has a story behind them. They all have their own history and lore that just hasn't been discovered yet. And the main one we care about is Lycon the Night Slayer, as it is the first unique boss Sunraku meets, and despite being a low level player at the time, because of his experience with completing trashy games that barely anyone plays, he's an absolute machine even though he's not a pro player. That's because the gameplay in Shangri La Frontier is so much more fluid than the games he's used to, so he's able to use his full potential that he learned from all the buggy games. And as you can imagine, this encounter ends with Sunraku's defeat. And not only that, Sunraku manages to meet certain conditions that make Lycon's curse his upper body. Oh yeah, and his curse makes it to where he can't equip gear on wherever the curse is. The attention to detail with how everything all connects is amazing. This series is able to fully immerse you in its world despite the lack of stakes by shifting the focus on what we're used to. In the usual fantasy, we're worried about the character's safety, about the life or death situations, so because the series lacks in that aspect and makes up for it by making the world so interesting and making us curious about the lore and history, it shifts our perspective into exploration, and it does it so naturally. Because of these random encounters, it makes us curious, and also makes this series unpredictable. Like genuinely, bro was just mining for some ores and suddenly he's fighting one of the 7 Colossi. What the fuck? I can't say this enough, but in this anime, this is just a game, a virtual coding, but its world feels so alive that it's easy to forget that. And that's what this series does better than most fantasy. When it comes to fantasy as a genre, the main selling point is the world. This is what separates good fantasies and bad fantasies. It's why shows like Dungeon Meshi became so popular compared to whatever generic fantasy was coming out during that season. By having intricate worlds with lots of lore and attention to detail, it's able to captivate the audience and immerse them into the fantasy. They make you want to learn more about the world. Fantasies that are able to do that effortlessly are some of the best pieces of fiction out there. And despite Shangri La Frontier not being your conventional fantasy, it does everything a fantasy should when it comes to showing off their world. Another cool thing that adds to the world building is the unique events that only you have access to. You get these by exploring the world and meeting certain criteria. Sunraku managed to meet the criteria to enter the Vorpal world, a world full of rabbits. This has nothing to do with my point, but we get introduced to one of the Vorpal bunnies, Emil. This rabbit is the most fucking adorable thing I have ever seen. Seriously, why is this rabbit so cute? I don't even like rabbits. This just goes to show how deep the lore of this world is. Players have only scratched the surface of what Shangri La Frontier has to offer. And with the introduction to Emil, we get informed that while players can respawn, NPCs can't. If they die forever. And if Emil dies, then I'm quitting the show. I don't care. Anyone can die as long as that bunny stays alive. Everything's okay as long as that bunny stays alive. Now, I know I've talked about how the world building is very immersive and great, but every once in a while, the series just completely switches up. Because this is a game, the main character Sanraku will have periods where he'll just play other games. I have no idea why I never thought about this. I thought for the whole series, he was just going to play Shangri La Frontier and that was the only game he'd play. Maybe I'm stupid, but the thought of him playing other games in the story just didn't come to mind. So for me, when he'd take a quick break from Shangri La Frontier and play other games, it came as a big shock to me. Now this could so easily break the flow of the story. By just completely shifting the story for sometimes a couple episodes at a time, this could have made it feel like filler. But the crazy thing is, it doesn't. The fact that it's still great despite completely foregoing its greatest strength, which is its world building. So how does Shangri La Frontier make up for this? Well, a couple things actually. Sanraku is entertaining enough to follow, so despite the shifting game, his character is enough of a reason to keep watching, even though we're in a completely different environment and vibe. And when I mean different vibe, I really mean it. We'll go from an adventure fantasy with magic and talking animals to a fucking full-blown mecha anime. And the way it tackles the filler feeling is by always intertwining it with the main plot of the story. Whenever Sanraku plays a different game, we always end up meeting characters who will eventually be really important to the overarching story. So you never actually feel like you're wasting your time. People like Oikatsu and Akitsukane you meet in a different game, separate from Shangri La Frontier, that eventually make their way towards the game and become a part of Sanraku's party. Hell, the mecha section in the show was a pretty long segment, and the two characters we meet in it end up being really important in the later half of season 2, despite meeting them and having no connection to Shangri La Frontier. Also, another thing, the other games we see are also just really fun to watch, especially near the end with the superhero game. The gaming community in the world is very well done, and having important events start from other games that lead to the main plot is a nice cool down to the constant grind, and by making it connect to Shangri La Frontier, whether it be through character introduction or plot progression, it makes it feel important to the story. Another cool thing that adds to the world is the political aspect behind the series. Information is very important in Shangri La Frontier, and because of how good Sanraku and his clan Wolfgang are when it comes to fighting bosses and unlocking unique scenarios, they are able to use that information to get an edge on the other clans and make alliances with whoever they want that'll give them an advantage. Then again, when you look at the leader Pensugon, who in a previous game managed to create her own dictatorship, I'm not really surprised that their clan is able to keep up with the political aspect of the game. It also helps that they were the first people since the creation of Shangri La Frontier to defeat one of the 7 Colossi. Sanraku, Pensugon, and Oikatsu defeating Weathermon, the Tomb Guard, gave so many opportunities for which direction the series could go. The world was always interesting, but you never really had a baseline for how the world would progress. In the beginning, it was kinda just a cool fantasy game with unique mechanics. But with the 7 Colossi being introduced, it started to become more interesting as these monsters lead to things that have never been discovered. An example of this is when Sanraku was able to go to the rabbit world because of his fight with Lycon. And that's what a lot of fantasies miss out on. Think about shows like Mushoku Tensei with the warping incident, where everyone caught in the range of that massive explosion was teleported to a random part of the world. Cataclysmic events that greatly affect the world, that adds so much to a fantasy world as it makes us ask questions and it makes us curious on what that'll lead to. With the death of Weathermon, we are introduced to a world progression meter which progressed to 12%. That means that the death of a Colossi triggers some sort of world event. And the world's progression isn't even a quarter complete, so this adds even more interest to the world as we have no clue what it's going to look like as the meter progresses. This level of mystery makes us wonder what will happen once the world progresses even more. This is how fantasies are supposed to make you feel. And not only that, we get more information on the history of the world with the death of a Colossi. Weathermon was originally a samurai from a forgotten past. This lets us know that technology of the past was way more advanced than it is now, so that gives us even more questions. What happened in the past? Why has the technology been lost? And don't even get me started on what's currently going on with the fucking other Colossi with his inverted and underwater but not really town. Shangri La Frontier has such an interesting world that I just wasn't expecting. This series is definitely not to be underestimated. Before I watched this series, I had no clue how extensively thought out it was. All I saw was a bird person and that it was a video game. If you haven't watched this series, then shit, I just spoiled a bunch of shit for you. Anyways, if you haven't watched this series, please give it a try. There are currently 2 seasons out and I feel like there's so much more to tell. We've only scratched the surface of what this series has to offer. And from what I've seen with how interesting it tackles the different colossi we've seen so far, I can't wait for how this series will handle the rest. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. And yeah, that's all I have to say. See ya.